So next, I want to talk a little bit about a theme that is one, I think, that defines the generation very strongly. And I think in a way that maybe isn't as pervasive as technology has been to our entire culture, but is certainly emotionally resonant with what's specific and unique to this generation. And that's the importance of experiences. So 86% of millennials that we talk to say that experiences are more important than possessions. 3/4 say the experiences they have define who they are. So their identities are built from their experiences. And just over half say they try to have experiences that'll give them things to post on social media. So just think about that one for a second. They will choose activities, I know from past research, given 2 options, well more than half of them will choose the one that will give them better social media material. Which means that, they're not just using technology to navigate the park. Technology is using them to navigate their real lives. It's this flow that goes both ways. But that's part of the importance of experiences, and I think speaks to the direct link that experience has with identity development. And travel experiences are some of their best. 87%, 87%, 87%. They all agree. Travel is some of the best and most important experiences. Having unique travel experiences are important, and having authentic travel experiences are important. So we wanted to dive a little deeper into the ideas of unique and authentic. So what makes a travel experience unique? I learned something new. 3 out of 4 millennials say, if I learn something new, that makes a travel experience unique. I don't know about you guys, but I was not expecting that to be the top answer. Nor did I expect it to beat the next answer by around 50%, to be around 50% higher than the next answer, which is to say 50% higher than 54%, which is, off the beaten path is important. Some of this not crowded, few people have done it, nobody I know has done it. Those are, like I said before, non-trivial amounts of people. But this learning something new and discovery thing is really big. I think if we can telegraph to them that we have undiscovered, off the beaten path experiences, will resonate with their search for unique experiences. In terms of the things they want to learn, a lot of them said they wanted to learn stand-up paddleboarding. That's a sporting activity. They also said they wanted to learn maple syrup making, or an art, or my personal favorite, of which I've only found limited evidence of in the Adirondacks, but which is getting big in Brooklyn, is beekeeping. I think that would be very cool. I keep bringing it up, I'm sorry, clients. It's going to be really big. So I think when we started this project, we didn't imagine that having this be one of your responsibilities to create a unique experience for millennials. Let them leave learning something. It's not in this deck, but we did ask them about the importance of history. They wouldn't necessarily be all that excited if we said, you're going to learn a bunch of history. If they do get some while they're here, sort of serendipitously, then that seems to be very appealing to them. But I think when they talk about learning, it's more about skills, hobbies, new points of view, things like that. So moving from unique to authentic, you get a slightly different profile here. Authenticity seems to be based for millennials around local culture, flavor, and traditions. Not too commercial and not touristy. These are things that we should be able to absolutely kill it on. But remember, they're simply not getting through. Mountains, camping, and hiking are the things that are getting through. It raises some question around, are we doing enough to connect visitors to local culture, flavor, and traditions? Is there enough intermingling between locals and visitors? A lot of the millennials we spoke to said they don't want to be tourists, they want to be travelers. And the idea that as a traveler, you're a visitor to a place where you're going behind the scenes. You're not just following your tour guide. You're befriending people along the way who can show you the hidden things that only locals know. So I think that just thinking through the implications of that, and can we do that more, and can we do it better, and should we, is important. So unique and authentic might be further afield. So if you want to see a magic show and horse diving, you might have to go further to find that quirky mix of activities. But more than half of people say they do have to travel farther to find unique and authentic experiences. So it stands to reason that a destination that's able to prove to visitors that it has more of those could potentially overcome some of that unwillingness to travel more than 4 hours that we saw what feels like ages ago. And it's not all new. There are things here that are probably to be expected. Accommodations are still key to a third of them. A third say the very first thing they would do when planning a regional trip would be finding a place to stay. Place to stay for a lot of people is just like the home base, and that's their landing point, and they travel. You know, the activities and meals and everything are sort of like the spokes around that hub. And millennials are picky but open about accommodations. So they say it's important that a destination has exactly the type of place I want to stay, except that 2/3 also say a variety of places to stay is the most important thing. It's what we call open but picky. I think that there's probably some wiggle here. And it's also important to think that there might be wiggle when you look at what millennials say their ideal place to stay at a regional destination is. It's all over the map. I'm just going to let you read for a moment while I take a sip of water. There's not really much pattern here. If you combine camping in the wild with camping with amenities, you're at 16%, which gets you roughly into the sort of like, I don't know. There's not really a pattern here. It stands to reason that there needs to be a diversity of accommodation stock. But one thing that's worth noting is, even if it wasn't their first choice, more than half of millennials say that they would consider using Airbnb or another home rental service. And so it's possible that one initial strategy would be to increase our stock of these things while we're waiting for other things to happen, because so many of them would do it, because so many of them consider it a way of having unique experiences once they're at a place, connecting people with locals and local traditions. Some of the things that you saw were hot buttons just a few slides ago. So that could potentially be something that could become increasingly important. And food. I knew food was important, but I didn't know it was this important. So 4 out of 5 say the quality of food on a regional trip is important to me. And 15%, which may not sound huge, but considering, this is a little bizarre to me, 15% say that finding places to eat is the first thing they do when planning a trip. And it's worth noting that millennials spend more money dining out than non-millennials. So the generation other than kids who have the least amount of money, who have been hit hardest by un- and underemployment during a recession, who are years behind in their careers, are choosing this moment to have little luxuries, and food is super important to them. They spend more than $20 a month over the amount that any other generation spends. And clearly it's linked to travel. So the implications here with the experience generation part of this is that experiences, and specifically travel experiences, are how millennials define themselves. And we need to get into the experience business, not the travel or tourism business. Learning, the undiscovered, and off the beaten path are how they gauge unique. We need to elevate those without leaning entirely on nature and sporting activities. Local culture and traditions are how they gauge authenticity. Are we doing enough to connect millennial visitors to these? Accommodations are key. More than half are willing to rent from residents. Maybe developing a stronger Airbnb base could be a stopgap while we develop, on a much bigger scale. And food is extremely important, and we're definitely not known for it. We need to elevate and invest in developing more equity here. So what do they think about us? More millennials are visiting here than you might have thought. At the beginning of the project, I felt as if the situation was more like they're not coming at all. But quite a few are coming. Awareness is high. I do think it's a little weird that 14% of people haven't heard of it in the Albany and New York City areas, and some of the areas in between, but 86% is high. More than half of upstate residents say that they've actually been to the Adirondacks, and 16% of New York City area millennials, again through the filter of people who travel regionally and who have done at least one sporting and culture event in the last couple of years, 16% of those have been to the Adirondacks. And if they've heard of us, they're very open to us. 89% say they plan to go to the Adirondacks in the future. I think that maybe one potential issue there is that they plan to go everywhere in the future. And so, 89% in the future is very vague. This feels more bucket listy than like I'm looking on my phone right now for a rental car or a hotel or anything like that. Nonetheless, it's not that people have a bunch of bad equity associated with it that makes them not want to go. There perhaps just isn't a sense of urgency. So we asked people why they wouldn't come, and there are three things that popped out immediately. There are some things we can't help, like the fact that for some of them we're too far, although we perhaps can help that by increasing their expectations of what they can have here. For example, a 5-day trip that includes a lot of different types of activities. So maybe we can help that a little bit. And the idea that we're too wild, remote, and uncivilized, I think we probably can help, but I just put it in this column anyway. Because it's not exactly true unless you choose one of a few very specific areas to get really deep into nature. As I drove by Starbucks in my class, it occurred to me that there are places within, very close to the state park that didn't feel wild, remote, or uncivilized to me. But the big things are awareness. These numbers are all kind of low because we asked people to just choose their top one. And there's an other option, which is why some of these stats don't add up to 100. But pretty much you'll see some of the same dynamics that we've seen in other areas, which is that awareness is a big problem. People don't know enough about it. They don't know where to start planning a trip, as we've said. And the place doesn't have any activities I'm interested in, which I just think is an awareness problem because there are so many activities here. I would imagine a lot of those people are simply mistaken. And then that social pressure thing pops up again. It's hard to persuade others. My friends haven't been, and I haven't seen anything online or in social media. And these are reasons why people wouldn't come. And then on top of the things we can't help, but maybe we can, that's why people wouldn't come. So what they know about us, the ability to get deep into nature, a huge variety of outdoor activities, and a place to get away and unplug. So deep into nature is not their top priority necessarily based on what we found out in the survey. It's one cool thing among lots of cool things they want to try. A huge variety of outdoor activities, often framed as sporting type activities, and that's only one way to define outdoors. Other ways include things like agriculture and maker culture that involve making things outside. Nonetheless, outdoor activities, huge to our current equity with millennials. And 86% say a place to get away and unplug. I don't know if you remember the slide from way back. Only 30% of them say that's why they travel regional. The rest of them are looking for adventure. So the things millennials know about us aren't exactly aligned. There's a misalignment. There's a mismatch. We're oriented the wrong way, especially when it comes to what millennials don't know about us. So I want to just make one point from a research hygiene standpoint. When you ask a bunch of people, do you know these things about a place, you're going to get something called a positive bias response, because people don't want to sound dumb, even though they're talking to a computer. And so a lot of these numbers are really high. So I knew the Adirondacks had these things. You can believe these numbers. I don't believe these numbers. I think that these are high. But rather than pick apart our own research methodology, we sort of know with this kind of question that's what happens. But just look, relatively speaking, high 80s to mid 40s to mid 60s. What millennials don't know about us are the things that are experience related, not the things that are outdoor related. So remember that because the way people take surveys, these numbers may look a little high. But the fact of the matter is, if you average out these things, and you average out the things on the previous slide, millennials are 50% less likely to know the Adirondack for these things than they are for the outdoor things, which again is a misalignment. It's like they want this and this, but we're aligned. It's like they're 2-to-1 culture, leisure to sports, and we're aligned 2/3 sports and outdoors to other. So it's like if we could just connect that a little bit better, we would probably have a lot more luck in changing millennial awareness of our full offering. And like I said, they're adventurers, but adventure includes exploring towns, local culture, food, and so on. It's obscured by the words, but that is a piece of machinery involved in making maple syrup, which during the course of this project became one of the strange obsessions that we had. As in focus groups, we watched a bunch of New York millennials say unironically they really wanted to do that. Yeah, well, they're coming. If we have any luck, they're coming. So here's one that we didn't really mean to stumble upon, but the idea of state park is actually not something that's really particularly helping us with millennials, and there's a reason for that. When we talked to what state park means, the reactions were pretty much neutral to negative, skewing to negative. Respondents didn't expect that all the things that we do could happen in a state park. You don't go out to dinner in a state park. People don't live in state parks. There aren't towns in state parks or emerging food or art scenes in state parks. And some of these quotations are kind of damning. You know, I picture like picnic tables and nothing. These are verbatim. So I have to say like in the spirit of research rigor. I think the state park has nothing. I picture an empty park. I assume it'll be poorly done. That's what comes to mind. Generic. This is a state park, and I'm not trying to say that we run away from who we are. However, as a first date message, this may not be sort of like your... The other thing we found is that an area the size of Massachusetts is highly polarizing, because people are like, that sounds scary, and if you're telling me that you have hiking and restaurants, I don't want to drive from Boston to Springfield to get dinner. So when we say we're a state park the size of Massachusetts, you already have two strikes against you in terms of kind of catching millennials, because they're scared of the amount of space, because it sounds like everything's so diluted, and they think that a state park, they're like, when does it close? How much does it cost? Is the parking free? Like, what are we going to do there? We don't want to waste valuable resources unselling the idea of what a state park is. We need to spend all of our resources selling what the Adirondacks is. And so, even though we're not changing, I think this is just something to scale back a little bit from that first date message. This was interesting. Cultural institutions are relevant, but we feel like it has to do with updating their definition of what culture is. And to say it in shorthand, I think it involves creating culture that doesn't happen within the walls or exhibits of that institution. We asked people about the Wild Center and what would make people more likely to visit it. There are a lot of things that are very closely ranked here. These are some of the top answers, but what's interesting is that live animal encounters, something you would expect from the Wild Center, is a statistical tie with a sampling of local food and beer. Guided walks and canoe trips are a statistical tie with maple syrup classes. We had to test it. We did. 3/4 of people want to do it. 71% of instructors say that instructors teaching activities, so for people who haven't maybe done things like canoeing or hiking with an expert or things like that. 71% want that, 72% want after-hour parties and concerts. So the experiences that we offer aren't just the ones that happen in our museum. They're not just the ones we curate from the standpoint of exhibits, exhibitions, things like that. It appears that we have permission from millennials, and maybe not even just permission, but also a responsibility to extend the definition of what we consider the role of a cultural institution. We should have local food and beer served in trucks. We should have after-hour parties. So expanding that definition means that it's probably fairly probable that we're not doing anything wrong today. We're just missing the other half of things that will help us get there tomorrow and help us make an even more profound kind of relationship with millennials. So what they think of us. There's more of them who may be visiting us than we think, and we think that part of the issue might be getting them to experience more than a single thing while they're here with us. There's just awareness once they're here of how much there is to do. If they've been here, they're more likely to come back. We found out that if people have been here, 73% of them say that they'd like to come back. And again, they also have a list of 44 other places and stuff like that, but that was more open than the number of people who hadn't been here. So we need them to leave with more ideas of what to do here next, marketing on-site to them better, marketing perhaps being too aggressive a word, but educating them while they're here as to what synergies there are between the area they're in and activities that might be nearby, or the way that a trip planned differently to a different part of the park might actually give them an entirely different new look. I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but millennials are 50% likelier to be aware of our outdoor activities than the ones that matter more to them a lot of the time. So yet again, we need to elevate. And I think elevating this idea of learning and being able to teach millennials something, things like food and drink and the unique and even quirky experiences we have to offer are all going to go far in terms of making this destination something that's more attuned to their interests. And they expect more from cultural institutions, and we have permission and maybe even a responsibility to offer the things that they're looking for. Learning, broader local culture, cultural events like concerts, plays, after-hours parties, things like that.